Good evening. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I would like to welcome all of you to our weekly broadcast from LaRouchepack.com of our live webcast featuring Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. Today is May 30th, 2014, and I'm joined in the studio by Dennis Mason. We're going to begin with our institutional question for the evening, which reads as follows. Mr. LaRouche, as you know, Mr. Poroshenko has been elected as the new president of Ukraine, to be inaugurated next week. He will be coming to meet with President Obama and with European leaders, and then he will meet with Russian President Putin. If you were in a position to advise Mr. Poroshenko, what would be your advice to him?
Okay. Well, I have an incomplete view of this matter because we're going to have to wait and see what these meetings are and how they count out, because this is a tricky issue. Now, there's a change in the whole situation in continental Europe, Western and Central continental Europe. France, with what has happened in the attack on Britain, which is really an attack, now means that France and Germany, France very clearly with this kind of thing, Germany also with much of what's going on in Germany, and what is potentially about to be put to a test in Italy, means that these three nations, which are the hard core of all Western Europe, have now taken a position of qualified fighting against the British system. Because that's when continental Europe, in its major national components, takes a position against Britain, that means the British Empire is being bored from within. Bored in more ways than one. Pigs not available otherwise. So there is no solution on terms of this question as such. There is no... we also have to understand that what Putin is doing. Now you have to look at the developments that are going on. Don't try to take a slice of history, a slice of the planet, and try to determine the policies in any part of the planet on the basis of any region. Because we are now dealing with a totally global structure. We have the development of the relationship of China, Russia, and India now. Now these are three nations in Eurasia, which now are the leading powers in Eurasia. Now you have Europe, three nations which are striking out against Britain, not explicitly, but implicitly. And implicitly is sometimes better than explicitly, because it implicitly lets you have some maneuver to manipulate the fears of your enemies. That's sometimes useful. What this whole means that we are now in a situation, strategically, what is clear, with one exception, what is clear, that the British Empire is now in a difficult situation because we have two parts of the Eurasian world which are now in question. And resistance against the British Empire is piling in. At the same time, we're on the verge of an imminent bail-in crisis which sweeps across from Western Europe across into the United States and beyond, areas beyond, transatlantic region. We're coming to a crisis point because an actual bail explosion in the transatlantic region would be absolutely chaotic in its effect on the planet as a whole. So now, therefore, you have several things that become clear. The problem of the planet will not come to a solution except in one way, as going toward thermonuclear war throughout the planet, or most of the planet, which will exterminate most everybody. And the Glass-Steagall role inside the United States, which is not an adequate solution, but is also another threat to the British Empire. The people in the United States, in the Congress and so forth, have yet to catch up with any semblance of reality. They're living in a world of fancy, assuming that the fancy of this Obama, who is nothing, he is nothing, he's just a nasty creature. He has no useful content. He has no useful purpose, except being a toady for the British Queen, British Empire. The British Empire is in deep trouble. Now, under such circumstances, there are a lot of uncertainties which all this poses. But there's one thing that stands out. The wrong turn, and you get thermonuclear war. So the question of what happens in this negotiation, in terms of the asserted but not yet clear situation of Ukraine. The Ukraine situation is by no means resolved. There's a bluff there. And we know how Putin operates. Putin does not operate except strategically. He does not operate tactically. He operates strategically. So that's our situation. And therefore, what we have to worry about is don't get distracted by an issue like this Ukraine policy. No, don't get distracted by that. It's an open situation which is not pulled out and pressed. It's the actual, what it's going to do, how it's going to react. It may not itself know how it's going to react. What you have is various kinds of potential options. You don't have something you can draw a deductive conclusion from. So the issue is we have to think about essentially the larger picture, which is not located in any one part of the whole planet. We have the significance is we have consolidation, a triad in the center of the Eurasian region, a triad, a dominant triad on the continent of Western Europe. We have the United States interests which are not settled, because the United States interests will not be settled until we bump Obama out of office. In the meantime, if this, and also you have the bail-in collapse, which is sitting on top of the situation. Now, this situation does not lend itself to any simply tactical interpretation of regional relationships. This is now a globally strategic issue. And if you can't grab the concept of globally strategic, you don't know anything about what's going on.
Well, let me follow up on what you mentioned with this earthquake that occurred last week in European politics. Across the board, you saw an overwhelmingly resounding rejection of the euro and the troika agenda of austerity. And this took the form of absolutely unprecedented electoral victories for a number of parties that had been previously merely minority parties, but which surged overnight into becoming the biggest parties in their respective countries. And these parties really come from all different sides, nominally, of the so-called political spectrum. But what united them was their common opposition to the dying euro system and the Brussels troika dictatorship. Now, what you put the premium on just now was what happened in France. And what we saw in France was a really dramatic victory of the Front National of Marine Le Pen, which won 26% of the vote for the European Parliament, which is a quadrupling of their vote of just 6% in the previous EU elections of 2009. This brought them to first place, compared to an abysmal mere 13% for the currently ruling Socialist Party of François Hollande, which came in third place. And then we saw the same thing elsewhere also. In Great Britain, the anti-Euro UKIP, or UK Independence Party, of Nigel Farage won 28%, which is double what they had previously received in the EU elections in 2009. And this marks the first time in over a century that neither of the two major British parties, Labour nor Tory, came in first place in a national election. In Ireland, Sinn Féin won its biggest electoral gains since 1918, coming in first place in both the local elections and in the European Parliament elections, making them now the largest party in Ireland and opening up discussion of the previously almost unimaginable possibility of Gerry Adams becoming Prime Minister in the very near future. And the list goes on. In Greece, the anti-Euro, anti-austerity Syriza party of Alexis Tsipras won 27% of the vote. In Italy, the five-star party of Beppe Grillo came in second with 21% of the vote. And I have to mention that all of this is also occurring at the same time that Keisha Rogers was running in the state of Texas. And despite the efforts of the Democratic Party establishment there, they secured a Pyrrhic victory because Keisha Rogers proved her worth as a candidate and the worthlessness of all of her opposition. So I think, as I said, what unifies all these parties in Europe is their opposition to the killer Euro dictatorship and their impulse to defend the sovereignty of their respective nation states. It's also notable that the leaders of most of these parties have come out personally and called for the restoration of Glass-Steagall by name, including Marine Le Pen, Nigel Farage, and Alexis Tsipras. So it's clear that there's a completely new political configuration coming into existence in Europe. And I know, Lynn, that you put a premium especially on what this situation in France portends in terms of the death of the Euro system, and also some of your background in terms of relationship with the Gaullist networks in France going back several decades. So what I'd like to ask is, with this new political configuration, what should be the true policy, the true future of Europe in relationship to the ongoing developments in China, Russia, and India, and their relationship between the two?
Well, the strategic answer, if you want a clear strategic answer, is get Obama out of the office of the president. The process of dumping Obama would be sufficient to screw up the threat, either the threat of thermonuclear war globally or the prevention of it. In other words, the attempt of dumping Obama can lead to become a triggering of thermonuclear war. Or more likely, if it's done effectively, it will be the end of the threat of general thermonuclear war. So that's the crucial point here. Now, what you're seeing otherwise, as you commented on these things, take the case of Le Pen and her party. This was a group which was organized. I knew these people. They were in touch with me, or the father was. And he tried to recruit me into involvement, engagement of things. But he became a little bit eccentric in his game playing. But nonetheless, there was significance there. Now, so what happened is the rise of the British control over France. And that's the only thing that you can say about France. France, when it became an appendage of the British Empire under the Socialist Party. So what had happened before this socialist formation, which I was also in the middle of, that my connections were with the Gaullist movement in and from France. And remember that in what we're doing in the SDI program, that my connection there was the French Gaullist power, which was very significant at that point. What happened was, when the British succeeded in getting a British agent in the position of the Soviet regime, that there was a change in the policy of what was the remnant of the Soviet system, who I was negotiating with the United States on behalf of President Reagan, the SDI policy. What the British did is they brought in Real Rush, a guy who had a Hungarian history, who was also a British asset. He was made the boss of the Soviet system. And that changed the policy and turned everything around, where the United States went along with it against President Reagan. Remember, the policy I was working was President Reagan's policy even before he was president. This represented the Franklin Roosevelt legacy, which is still alive, and the Reagan leadership. Reagan's key thing was his connection to the Franklin Roosevelt connection. And President Reagan, who had been subjected to an assassination, which didn't kill him, but the assassination was part of the same package as the assassination of John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. Except Ronald Reagan didn't die. He's a kind of a tough old bird his own way, but he was very damaged. And this whole process produced a change, largely with the Bush family at the center of it, a change to the worst, not to the better, worse, but to the worst. And that's what we've gotten. So now you're at a point where you have the Wall Street crowd, which is an Indian section of the British Empire. Wall Street is a British imperial product. It is not an American patriotic institution in any means. As a matter of fact, if we could eliminate Wall Street, you know what would happen? First of all, most of the money that's in the United States in the form of debt claims would, boop, gone. Immediately, suddenly, the greatest part of what is listed as the financial monetary assets of the United States as a nation would disappear. But the part that would disappear would be the part what we know we should get rid of. So by destroying and bankrupting the high-grade speculators, the super speculators, who've created this vast hyperinflationary growth inside the United States, the elimination of Wall Street and what it represents. To be clear, you have to be careful about this, because Wall Street today incorporates banks which were really banks, who conducted their business as banks would under the United States law. What came in was this hyperinflationary speculation. Now, if you collapse that, which is the real Wall Street speculation, you suddenly, the debt of all, the collective debt of the people, etc., of the United States, suddenly shrinks because there has been no actual net growth in the economy of the United States since the beginning of the 1970s. There has never been a moment of net actual physical economic growth in the United States. In matter of fact, there has been an accelerating decline in the actual physical capacity of the United States. So the United States is an impoverished nation living under a fat slob called Wall Street and the British Empire. So therefore, we have a difficult problem here, which is no longer a matter of trying to guess. It's a matter of trying to say what must be done, not who some mysterious person is going to cause this to happen. All the forecasters, Wall Street type forecasters, they're out of consideration. I'm much better at this than that all of them are. Because why? Because I accept the reality of what the economic situation as a physical economic situation, not a monetarist problem. The monetarist system is about to blow out. So if the monetarist system is allowed to continue, then you will get thermonuclear war. Because as long as Wall Street, as Wall Street is today, then that factor of Wall Street control over the United States government, especially among the past 2 presidencies, which means 3+ terms of the President of the United States since Bill Clinton left office. That is evil. That is pure evil. And George Bush himself, the older George Bush, who is now playing tiddlywinks with something or other, is also a factor in this. So therefore you're in a situation where the question is, what's going to determine the future? All I can do is boil down to you what the options are for the choice of the future. My option is sink Wall Street, dump Obama, there will be no war. And what will happen at the same time, you will wipe out the trillions of dollars of high debt ratios sitting on top of Wall Street. That would mean you would collapse everything that's Wall Street. That is, as the speculative part of Wall Street, the high gain thing, the trillions of dollars thing. You would then reduce the Wall Street to its raw constituents, which would be the kinds of banks which were banks, even with all their defaults, in part. Because then suddenly what you would do, you would immediately wipe out, by government action of the federal government of the United States, by some very simple legislation, simple in terms of what it means, that would collapse the total claims against the economy of the United States, because you would wipe out the super debt, but you would have the remainder of banks which had been part of accomplices of Wall Street. Then we would have to go through a 4-step process, which I've spoken of before. The first thing you have to do is to have to get Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall will not solve the problem. And all this goes with the threat. If we can say to the American people, and they respond, we're going right now to Glass-Steagall, that would change everything. It wouldn't solve the problem. It would change everything. That would bankrupt Wall Street. And that's why Wall Street is doing what it's doing. That's why the Republican Party is doing what it's doing. That's what the Republican Party was doing in hurting Democrats against Keisha's campaign for Senate. Huh? All right, you sink that. Once you've gone back to Glass-Steagall, you now are in a position to pull the plug out of Wall Street, because at that point the speculative element, it's simply a game of monopoly. Wall Street is a game of monopoly on a global scale. If you say the monopoly chips are no longer negotiable, what happens to the game of monopoly? You're then left with a real economy, which has real elements in it, as opposed to this purely speculative monetarist system. But that means then you have to make changes, because you have no money. You have reduced the debt of the United States, of the people of the United States as a whole, but you've left over the fact that they don't have anything to build with. So therefore you have to have a credit system created to support Glass-Steagall on several, there are 3 levels of particular reforms that have to be made immediately to buttress the reality of a Glass-Steagall success. That would put the United States immediately back, not into riches, but into going upward when it has been going downward for the American people and the American economy ever since this turn was made, in terms of the collapse of Wall Street, which occurred in the period from 1968 to 1971-72, which is where I first got into big play. So these are, when you put things in that form, rather than simple questions, yes or no, then you have options. Now, options mean you have to make decisions. The decisions you have to make are changes in the present trend to a different trend, a change in direction. And that's the kind of thing I like to do.
Okay, so this, as Matt mentioned earlier, this past Tuesday, Keisha Rogers polled 28% of the vote in her runoff election in Texas for the office of federal senator. The voter turnout overall was very low. On the Republican side, there were only 750,000 who voted. On the Democrat side, it was a mere 190,000. The Democratic Party had relied on suppressing the vote, not to produce a winning candidate, but to try to determine who the loser would be. Now, after the election on Wednesday, Keisha wrote a statement, which I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from. She wrote, "The war to defeat the enemy of mankind does not stop here. Our fight for a renewed republic must go on in the interest of the future. The victory that was gained by gloating Obama loyalists and pro-Wall Street Democrats on May 27th was a Pyrrhic one, in which their method of victory, suppressing the vote, will haunt them in the future as voters reject them for their unwillingness to tackle the real crises facing our nation. There was no substance to it, no inspiration. How could they be trusted to address the real challenge before them, a drought-stricken, food-depleted, financially bankrupt, dying Texas, left without a truly scientific mission to conquer these threats? Our identity," she wrote, "must come from creating the future. Each of us must ask, what is going to be our next step to continue the fight to shape the future? We have changed the discussion of politics in this nation with what we did in this campaign, laying the truth of the impeachable crimes of Obama and impeachment right at people's doorsteps, while presenting them with a sound solution, and there were many who chose to respond. The only way to win wars and gain victory over our nation's historic enemy, centered today in the city of London, is through strategic thinking, through flanking them. Some battles are won and some are lost, but in the end, the ultimate victory will come from the fight to save mankind from a dying empire, the intent of which is to destroy the identity of the truly creative human mind, which is capable of mastering and solving any problem which confronts us. Victory over that enemy does not come from a vote. Victory over that enemy is obtained through changing and transforming the population to a level of understanding their God-given creative potential, to actually take responsibility for being an instrument of the Creator, as we are in the image of the Creator, to be able to continue that process of creation with mastery over the universe." Now, you can find the entirety of her statement on the website. And I want to say here that one of the elements of Keisha's campaign for the Senate seat, which could not be suppressed, is that she has squarely put the issue of the impeachment of Barack Obama on the table from within the Democratic Party. And that could not be, so to speak, put back into the bottle. Now, Keisha is in California, where Michael Steger, who is running for the federal Congress out of San Francisco, he is holding a town hall meeting leading into the primary election there this Tuesday. And as was the case with Keisha's campaign, his campaign is finding resonance with a population which is hungry and ready for a change in the direction of the nation. He's challenging the seat of Nancy Pelosi, who has bent over backwards to defend Obama, who is increasingly hated by the people of the United States. It's not necessarily a very popular position to hold. Now, Keisha and Michael, their campaigns demonstrate leadership and demonstrate how history is actually changed by defying popular opinion and defying the oligarchy which has maintained control over our political system a little too long. I'd wanted to give you the opportunity to address this here during this webcast.
Well, I would change your agenda on several accounts. Well, there are several points to consider, because the usual thing about the hero of Jeanne d'Arc, again, she's not Jeanne d'Arc. She's only Jeanne d'Arc in the sense that she has the spirit of Jeanne d'Arc. But I can tell you, without what we did, what I did with her, and some other people in the policy committee did together, there would have been no near success in the Texas campaign. Because most parts of our organization as such do not have the orientation to win elections. But they have opportunities which they hope they will get some credit and gain from. They're not thinking about winning a war. They're thinking about surviving with a margin of success and hoping that somehow out of a gain of a margin of success as opposed to a failure, that you will get momentum to continue your political organization's life. That is the typical weakness in our organization, which I fight against. This is silly. You think that you're fighting because of some people vote and some people don't. Some people vote more and some people don't. You're a child in politics. The usual stuff that the people are taught to believe in about votes and so forth is absolute nonsense, especially under these kinds of circumstances. An election victory for a party. A party is an instrument. It is not a means. It's a means only as an instrument of history. It's not public opinion. The general record for public opinion of the U.S. population, of citizens, is crap. They have not been able to accomplish much of anything since Bill Clinton left office, among other things. That is dead meat. You have two generations now, each of about 20 to 25 years of age. Those two recent generations are absolutely incompetent, yet they are a very significant factor of the whole operation. They are being used. They are not using. The citizens are not voting on the basis of courage. They're voting only on the basis of real leadership. And the difference was that Keisha's policy, her campaign policy, was unlike any other policy that we've run in our organization as campaigns, and for a long time. What was being run was a policy of opportunism. You say the magic words, and people like the magic words. Then you win more votes, and you might get even more votes for you. You're not going to change the evil which has to be cured. You're saying our problem people, like most people in the United States, have no conception of history. They believe that you come up to the edge of an opportunity to steal or buy or gain something. You're looking for tomorrow. You're looking for the short term. You're looking for, say, 4 years of a college education, or maybe 2 years. And your sense of what you're going to do to move history is essentially nil. You go out with dreams. You have fantasies. You have sex affairs, love of sex affairs, which come and go very easily. And that's the typical condition of the United States and its people. There's no real guts in the U.S. population, political guts, none. What there is you have to understand from above. You have to understand what the problem is. Then what you have to do is present a future to the population which it would never have dreamed of without your leadership. And that is exactly the characteristic method of Keisha. That is also Tiger's attitude. Same way. So therefore, what I did is said, okay, we're not just having a Texas campaign. We're having a Texas, Northern California campaign. One for Senate. One for House. Put them together. These two states, Texas and California, are the largest two states in the entire United States. If you are able to turn the tide in the state of Texas and part of the state of California, and you really are doing it. You're not doing one of those opportunist things. We're going to have a voice. People, the popular opinion will love what we'll have them licking up. Nah, it's nonsense. It's childishness. It's everybody likes to talk that way. What you have to present is not a successful conviction of popular opinion. What you have to do is go beyond popular opinion. You have to create an image of the impossible. That is what the people so far would never dream of doing. And the way you change a situation like the present situation in the United States, particularly the past two terms of office here, which is now coming close to 8 years. We have a population now which was not alive then. They hadn't been born. And mostly 2 generations have not been born yet. And they still haven't been born intellectually. That's reality. You expect these people who are not born intellectually to make a decision based on their judgment? No, what you would go for, not for this mass thing of the so-called polls and popularity. What you have to do is you take a people who are absolutely desperate, which is the reality of our people in the United States, except for the Wall Street crowd. And they're desperate in a different way. It's like the devil's desperation. That's what they represent. So what do you have to do? You have to create an answer to the unasked question. What is the solution for this consistent downing of the United States economy, for example? The United States economy has made no net progress in its population's efforts, in its economy, ever since the assassination for the candidacy for presidency of the other Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. Right? So there has been what was done, attempted by Ronald Reagan. His attempted assassination was a keystone of preventing us, me in particular, from getting STI through. It was orchestrated by the British Empire. It was not orchestrated by Americans. Yeah, there was a bunch of members of Congress who were whores intrinsically. Immediately turned around this way, the way they did, because of their electoral considerations. Their investments in the next election. And when they got by with that by getting a British agent as the new Soviet leader, that turn of putting that British agent in charge of the Soviet Union is what sunk the SDI. I had personally negotiated with the leading Soviet officials of record on the negotiations of the conditions of SDI. This change from Britain in the leadership of the Soviet Union is what killed the SDI. How many people in the United States knew that? How many people in the world knew that in terms of general population? How many people in the world even dreamed that that was the case? So the answer to these questions is for 2 things. First of all, you have to have a conception which is far better than anybody else has. That is in terms of general population. You have to lift the general population out of its stupidity by presenting it with an inspiration by which it will mobilize itself to accomplish what the American Revolution did in its case. Under terrible conditions, under terrible corruption throughout the colonies, the 13 colonies, were totally corrupted. And a few people, led by Benjamin Franklin, moved this thing internationally. Who voted for this? Who voted to start the American Revolution in a way that could win? Benjamin Franklin. Who was acting on the behalf of Cotton Mather, who had assigned him to that mission. So you had the previous centuries, American colonization in Massachusetts had been the birthplace of what became the success of the founding of the United States as a nation. All right. So the point is that that all real changes in a situation like this have what we call, technically at least, not in description, but technically a revolutionary change. A change from above, comparable in precedent to what happened in the formation of the Golden Renaissance, which was an initiative provoked in part by Jeanne d'Arc's murder by the British interests at that time, which enraged the leadership of Christianity on the continent to create a Golden Renaissance, something which was introduced from the outside, entirely out of all currents of opinion at that time. Everything was going in a different direction historically. And if you want to save the United States, stop talking about popular opinion. What Keisha did, and she's backed up on by Steagall, what she did, she was a candidate which no other member of our organization running would possibly even begin to see. You want a solution? Find the person who is not blind, who can see the way to the future. And the way she led her campaign, to my great pleasure, was that she did the job. She led our people in what they did in Texas, and they were dragging their feet to a large degree in the process. That is the nature of the intrinsically revolutionary character of every successful, most crucially important moment in history. So don't talk about the practical, deductive interpretation of history. Deductive history is crap. It's inherent failure. Most of the people of the United States, of my knowledge, from my life, back in 1922, from everything I know, the masses of people are really impotent. They pick on goals and ambitions which have no real inherent possibility of realization. And only when a real leadership arises, like the leadership of the American Revolution itself, then you have a transformation of the population through that quality of leadership. And it means an insight by those who are leaders, an insight into the failures, the errors, which popular opinion represents. You have to really startle popular opinion to quitting up and stop being popular opinion. To see that they have to step aside and find a new alternative to the folly in which they're walking. And that's reality. History is like that. People are trained in society to believe that practical experience is a lesson book which shapes history. No, such a lesson book condemns entire nations and cultures to destruction. It's the imagination to see the future, not as an arbitrary imagination, but an insight into the error which is inherent in the present system of government. To change the attitude of an influential group of people in government and outside it. To say, what we're doing is crap. It will get us nowhere. We're having votes on this and votes on that and revotes on that and so forth. It is all crap. It will lead you no place. You are still going down the hill in a rock slide into a chasm. You have to stop the rock slide. You have to take things in a different direction. And Keisha did that kind of job. Now what's happened is that as a result of what she's done, and she actually got more votes than you indicated. They were not properly, and we've got people from Texas who've given us information on how that worked. But nonetheless, now let's look at it practically. Let's talk about the stupidity of the Democratic Party. How was this done? It was done by the Republican Party. How did the Republican Party do it? Well, Obama really was working on the basis of support from the Republican Party. And the Republican Party in Texas, for a great deal of the Republican Party, as a machine, was working for the Democrats were working for the Republicans on their policy. Now what has happened? Now we're coming toward another electoral process, which is already in place. We have presidential campaigns are essentially implicitly on the horizon. Not immediately, but there is a direction. The next step will be going into the next election phase. What's going to happen? Well, the Democratic Party tied itself to the Republican Party against Keisha. They mobilized the Democratic Party to oppose Keisha, who was the only standing Democratic candidate. So what kind of a Democratic Party was that would do that? A bunch of jackasses who haven't got legs. They just bray. Since they can't pray, they bray. All right, now the Democratic Party is coming now into the mobilization for a presidential candidacy. It's also coming into the fact that there's a great crisis, a collapse, a general financial collapse, which could be a total collapse of the U.S. economy. So you can't sit there. It's not going to be steady. The minute we turn this thing around, when events turn it around, you're going to find the Democratic Party's in a problem. If the Texas Democratic Party continues to support the Republican Party, which it did in voting against Keisha by saying she's not a Democrat. History for you. So therefore, the Democratic Party's now got a crisis. They are guaranteed almost to lose the next election in any case, at best case, because they went along with Obama. And they went along with Obama in a way on the pretext of supporting Obama against the Democratic Party in Texas. Would you want to follow such leadership? Do you think the American people will be able to find success in that leadership? And intelligent Democrats, and there are also some intelligent Republicans, but they're few and far between. They seeing this situation, the only hope for coming voluntarily, as democratically, into a success of the United States, for the continued existence of the United States, you have to get these Democrats crawling in shame, saying, forgive us, forgive us. We didn't see, we didn't understand. We were looking for a buck. We were looking for a handout, not for a future for our nation. So don't go, the deductive approach, which is sold repeatedly to people as the answer in politics, placate the suckers. The great Barnum principle, without elephants. The great suckers of the American people, as long as they believe that they have to vote for what they see is the current trend of opinion. And the problem we have in the world now is the current trend of opinion, which has been solidified over several decades, is the problem. If you can't get rid of that influence, that dream, that habit, if you can't get the people of the United States to recognize it, they are doomed. And you're not going to get any help from them by trying to be nice to them if you're supporting them in their choice to continue to be doomed.
I want to ask a question. Some of what you just said made me think about this also. Something you've been bringing up a lot lately on the real meaning of law and what that implies about patriotism. Next week, as people may know, will be the 1-year anniversary of the first Snowden revelations on the mass government surveillance of American citizens. And this past Wednesday, Edward Snowden did his first ever interview with a U.S. media outlet, giving a 1-hour interview to NBC television. And what I found very interesting was that in the interview, he made a point of distinguishing between two types of law. The merely positive law of what is so-called legal and illegal according to statute, which may change over time, and the natural or moral law of what is right. And he stressed that when these two types of law are in discordance, there have been many instances in our nation's history in which true patriots have been forced to break one type of law in order to defend the other. For example, he said this. He said, "I think the most important idea is to remember that there have been times throughout American history where what is right is not the same as what is legal. Sometimes to do the right thing, you have to break a law. And the key there is in terms of civil disobedience." Later in the interview, Brian Williams asked him if he sees himself as a patriot, and he said, "Yes, I do." And then he went on to discuss what the idea of patriotism means to him. He said, "I think patriot is a word that's thrown around so much that it can be devalued nowadays. But being a patriot doesn't mean prioritizing service to government above all else. Being a patriot means knowing when to protect your country, knowing when to protect your Constitution, knowing when to protect your countrymen from the violations of and encroachments of adversaries. And those adversaries don't have to be foreign countries. They can be bad policies. They can be officials, and so on." And then finally, he said this. He said, "If you want to be free, we cannot become subjects of a surveillance state. We can't give away our rights. We have to be an active part of our government. And we have to say, there are some things worth dying for. And I think this country is one of them." So, I think it's very clear that Snowden represents a very rare type of American, especially among his generation. But in a more profound sense, I know, Lynn, that you have spoken repeatedly about your personal experience of the type of fear, amorality, the type of littleness of identity that came with the Truman witch hunts, but also in the aftermath of the assassinations of Kennedy and his brother Robert. And of course, you've had your own share of persecution at the hands of a government which has at times become the enemy of its own people. And so I thought maybe you could give us some insight into what the true concept of natural constitutional law should be.
Well, the way for Americans to understand what Snowden is doing, and I don't know how clearly Snowden himself understands what he's doing, but obviously what he has said in that 1-hour address, which I saw today, broadcast. I saw the copy of the broadcast. It's very attractive. The problem there is it does not, and that's not a fault in his. The problem in the discussion is probably in the framework of the discussion. That if you want to get to fundamentals, you have to say, well, the problem of our government is that for a long time, with the development of what became known as the Confederacy, which was a treasonous attack on the existence of the United States, where people were bought and sold by telling other people who were bought and sold, and not really paid for either. So that Abraham Lincoln and John Quincy Adams and Monroe as well succeeded where Washington and Hamilton had succeeded in their footsteps. And under the influence of John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln had come to a realization of the fullness of his potential. And Lincoln had acted with good temper to deal with what was he dealing with was absolute treason. And the way he handled it was to for the forgiving view if you stop the treason, the war will end. But the Confederacy was a state of traitors. Lee was a conscious traitor to the United States. Who was he working for? Who was he consciously working for? Lee. Lee was working for the British monarchy, the harshest enemy of the United States. How do we win? How do we win? The United States had no money. It was bankrupted on Abraham Lincoln's accession to office. He sneaked around to duck the assassins who were trying to get him in various traps here and there. Well, what he did was he went to the Department of Treasury and he put forth a law which doesn't exist in the United States now. Cancel this crap. He came in with greenbacks. What's the greenback? The greenback is the only honest form of money that the United States should ever possess in its own name. The greenback is a system of credit which is operated and controlled and regulated through the Department of Treasury of the United States, which eliminates states' rights concessions, which was the means by which the United States was repeatedly subverted, and subverted to become an auxiliary to the British Empire. So these people did not intend to be traitors to the United States, but because of their own personal greed in trying to make more money. But the other side of the thing was that the United States system, as defined by all the founders, particularly Alexander Hamilton, that money has no intrinsic value. That the idea that money as itself has intrinsic value is the essential moral satanic corruption which has destroyed the United States and other nations repeatedly. The idea that money per se, called monetarism, represents economic value is the greatest fraud ever perpetrated in modern times, or known times. What was Hamilton's policy? What was the policy of the United States? The policy was that is production. The policy of production, of developing the economic powers of the nation, increasing the power from movement to movement. If you did something this time, do something at it to make it better. So the increment of profit should only be attributed to progress in the effects and the benefits of economy. That the idea that money per se should buy the soul, which is what the problem is. And that's our system. So what's happened is the United States mainly has had some great presidents with great intentions, some which were able to realize some of those intentions, others not. But the greatest number of presidents of the United States were swine. And we have better swine in our backyard upstairs, out there, than we have actually in the Congress. Because they all are monetarists. And monetarists is what, it's the Judas principle. Anybody who's a monetarist is an unrepentant Judas and should be treated. He should not be hanging around too long. And this is what the issue is. The issue is to have a society which is based on principle means you have an anti-monetarist society. The principle is the increase of the productive powers of labor of mankind and the fruitful productive powers of labor. Mankind is a species not to be treated like an animal. Wall Street treats human beings in the United States as animals, and animals often get better treatment than Wall Street affords our own people. So therefore, and what happens with that? It's a principle of chemistry. the problem is one I'm familiar with and I'm an expert in, is what is the meaning of economy? It is actually, it's a principle which is unknown to most professors and others in the United States of authority. They don't know what reason is. They have no true consent of human reason. They have no understanding of the difference between mankind, a human being, and an animal. They don't really know the difference. Therefore they say, well, we're going to treat these guys as slaves, otherwise as animals. We as other animals are going to control them. We're going to have bigger fangs than the people we control. We'll eat them. We'll kill them. We'll roast them on Tuesday. There was no morality there. If it is not human, it cannot be morality. If it's money, it cannot be morality. Now, the denial of money to people can be a crime because you have denied them the opportunity of organizing their lives on a true principle. So now they make beggars of you. I need a job. I got to get some money. I need a job. Who's going to hire me? Do I have to steal? Maybe I should steal. Do you think I can get by with it? Well, if you want to steal and get by with a theft, you better become a lawyer. I mean, these are the realities. What is mankind? Mankind is, our dear friends from Russia, Vernadsky in particular. Vernadsky understood this problem. The human being, what's the difference between a human being and an animal? I know what the difference is. Most people don't. So why are they so dumb? Why don't they know what I know? The human being is unique in the sense that no other living process known to us at all is able to become the equivalent of a human individual. Because the human individual develops through a process of chemistry, true chemistry, that mankind is the only species which can willfully increase its chemical power as a species. It's willful. No other species can do it. Value, human value, is the increase of the productive powers of labor, which can be measured in competent chemistry, is the rise in the efficiency of the equivalent of the periodic table. Now, the periodic table, which was developed essentially in the course of the 19th century, is a simplistic approximation of what we in this present century and so forth were able to understand in terms of physical chemistry. What happened is Satan, in the form of one idiot from France, but also from the pure Satan who really ran the British Empire during the 20th century, Bertrand Russell. That is Satan. So now what happens is you make money as such the nexus of humanity. You don't make productivity in those terms of chemistry. And that's the principle of Vernadsky, V.I. Vernadsky. And that's the principle that I was involved in this past Wednesday. And we had a demonstration of how the classical music as opposed to pig music, all that is not classical music is pig music. And sometimes the pigs are better singers. At least they're more convincing. So the problem is we don't have a morality in the United States generally today or in Europe. Because the belief about humanity is that money is somehow the issue around which society should be organized, or monetary wealth, or monetary gain, or the equivalent. The idea of the development of the greater productivity. For example, the green policy, any use of the green policy, whether in the United States or in the British system, a green policy is actually a system of mass murder against the human species. That's what it does, that's what it is. because it denies, it prevents. And what it prevents defines the green policy as intrinsically the policy of what is called Satan. Anybody who goes along with a green policy in the United States, supports it and tries to push it through by law, is committing a satanic act against civilization. Because this very process means a system of slavery, which a slavery system by the Queen of England and her family, which are reducing, by the green policy, are destroying the possibility of the continuation of human life in terms of the United States and beyond. The intention of the Queen of England, who is a satanic creature, explicitly, systemically satanic, is to reduce the human population explicitly from about 7 billion people recently to less than 1 as soon as possible. Her entire policy is that the green policy is a policy of forcing a reduction of the human population and a induced bestialization of the few survivors allowed to live. That's the political issue. The British Empire must be destroyed. Because as long as we tolerate that empire and allow it to have the power of this type over the destiny of our own people in the United States and other nations, we are under the rule of literally the true Satan. And that's the issue, that we in the United States must realize the true law is a law that conforms with the nature of the human being, of the human species. The nature of the human species is the increase of the energy flux density, which mankind in mankind's development is able to reach as higher and higher levels. These are the means by which we can defend the existence of life on Earth, by dealing with asteroids which could wipe out the whole human species in one blow if they were apt to hit us direct on. So our inability to deal with that kind of problem is itself the result of evil. Because time has passed when we should have been able to fix that problem. That's the real issue. And the problem is the idea of law, proper law, is law which conforms to what I've just specified as the requirements, which are the requirements of the Christians as opposed to the Satanists. The Queen of England is, by all standards, a Satanist, just like her predecessor, the Roman Empire.
Well, you preempted me. I was going to ask you a final question about Vladimir Vernadsky and the address that you gave to the St. Petersburg Pobist-Kuznetsov conference this past week, but I think you got there before I did, so I think I'm going to take that as the concluding word of our webcast tonight, and thank you very much, Lynn. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Thanks, Dennis, and stay tuned to LaRouchepack.com.